Well, as I understand the situation in Israel, we're having a big change because we've grown from a small homogenous community of a couple hundred families in the early 50s to a much larger community of 700,000 people, very diverse, of different talents, different abilities, different aspirations, and they're people who've grown up in a system. This system has got to adapt to a much more varied clientele. It's not just a single-minded devotion to pure Torah learning and nothing else. There's so many people who need more, and we're going to lose our children if we don't provide them with opportunities. Basically, I'm a University of Chicago graduate. I believe in the free market. I think there has to be a market of opportunities from which families can choose according to the abilities and aspirations of their children if we want to keep them within the mainstream community. If there's so often a boy who feels that he asks his father, what am I going to be when I grow up? And his father tells him, you're going to be a kollel junger man. And if that's the only option that's held open to him, and he's already struggling in Gemara, in Elam Mitzias, then you've pronounced the death sentence on him. If you've told him there is nothing else that you can ever flourish in, there's nothing else that you can ever succeed in, there's nothing else that you can never aspire to be more than mediocre, then you've pronounced a death sentence on him. If we don't provide opportunities for these young men, all young men, to find themselves and give them the maximum number of skills that they can, so that each one will find his own place. I mean, I have 7 sons, so I know this problem straight up, but I have 6 sons who are, I would say, gifted. I have one son who was above average but not gifted, but I get more compliments on him today. He learns in kollel in the morning, he repairs appliances in the afternoon, and I think he's going to be supporting all his brothers as time goes on. I tell him, you're going to have to set up a fund for your nephews and nieces' wedding from your earnings, but I get more compliments on him from people who come up to me and say, you know, the Kiddush Hashem that your son made, what he and his wife do, it's just such a pleasure to meet an honest repairman, to meet somebody who goes me'alo me'ever. I couldn't have more pride and more satisfaction from him. And this has to be one of the options. It has to be one of the options. And I think that's, this Hachmey Lev is not holding itself open as the ideal. There is no such thing as the ideal. There are a lot of different types of young men who need different frameworks and are comfortable with different frameworks. But this one offers the opportunity to change course. You're just giving a multiplicity of talents and skills and knowledge, which they will make choices later. I mean, that really, the key to real high-level learning is always people made choices. You ask the difference between what happened, why do they produce more Gedolim in Europe? We have more people learning today than ever learned in Europe. Because the ones who went to Yeshiva in Europe chose it. They were going against the Zerem. It wasn't something that was just, they weren't just going with the flow. They were choosing against it. We've gotten to a point here where it's just accepted that you'll be in Yeshiva. But there are no demands on you. If you don't learn well today, or you don't learn well this man, it'll be another's man, and another's man, you'll start again next man. Because that's what you're going to be doing the rest of your life. Time stretches endlessly in front of you. There, they had to make a real choice. And the choice often involved difficulties in finding a wife who was interested in that, difficulties in a livelihood and so forth. So they were making choices. What Hachmey Lev does is empowers students to make choices, because it gives them the ability to make choices. They're not being hamstrung so that they can't do anything else besides be kollel junger man or a failure. Those are the 2 choices that are held open to most young men today. Either be a kollel junger man or a failure. Here you don't have to define yourself. Those are not the only options available. To be a ben Torah, a person for whom Torah learning is the center of his life, but who's also earning his livelihood in some other way, is not defined as a failure. And that's something that it's very hard for people from America and Europe to understand, is how much different it is here. There was a 2-generational phenomenon. The Chazon Ish said that we had to rebuild the citadels of Torah that were destroyed by the war. Those 2 generations have passed. And they were remarkably successful. We've seen a miraculous rebirth of Torah learning. in a way that no one could have ever predicted. No one believed, not in the religious world and not in the secular world in 1950s, what would happen here. A miracle has taken place, but the Belzer Rebbe said it very well recently. He said, the first 60 years of our existence here was a miracle, and what was created was a miracle, but we'll need no less of a miracle to preserve that. If we just think we can continue along in the same way, that won't do it. We also need to know that societies have to adjust, and if they don't adjust, they die. And just as that was a completely something new, the pendulum has to swing to some extent towards a degree of normalcy. In Europe, I mean, what percentage learned? In every yeshiva, a boy was known by the name of the town he came from because it was assumed there'd only be one boy from that town. I mean, you were the Yaakov Dolinover, Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky was Rav Yaakov Dolinover, or Rav Aaron Minsker. They were known by the name of the place they came from because there was one from each town.
Tell me, in terms of American yeshiva high schools, are there similar yeshiva high schools in Israel than you have in America?
There are very few. I think there are developing, especially as there are more.
Sorry, do you mind repeat?
They're very. I'm sorry.
Clarify
Yeah. There are very few yeshiva high schools in Israel on the model of America. In America, it's assumed that you will have, it's assumed that there will be some secular learning. There are places which emphasize it more and places that emphasize it less. But in Philadelphia yeshiva, which was always considered one of the top high school yeshivas, they emphasize secular studies, that you shouldn't do anything to waste your time. If you're doing it, you should do it well. Whatever you're doing, do it well. That's an ideal. It's sometimes less applied in reality, but there is still, it's assumed that should be, that some degree of secular knowledge just goes with the game. You speak the language of the country, you develop some writing skills, you know some history, you're able to go on, you're able to build on that. Too often, young men here, if they're innumerate and ill and don't speak English, which is crucial for many of the professions that you learn in Israel, you have to have English. And just the mere fact of lacking English. And it's interesting that some of the Gedolim have come out. Rav Vosner is 101 years old. He goes back to Europe. It's not that he doesn't represent the tradition, is telling people in a cheder in Bnei Brak, you have to teach English, but they refuse to do it. They refuse to do it because they're afraid that people will stop sending their children there. But that is swinging. When I talk to parents today, I talk to every young man that I deal with, yeshiva products, people who are involved, and I say, is it important to you that your son should know English? And almost invariably they say, it's very important to me. But there are no frameworks in which that's going to happen right now. You either have to supply it. I mean, my children were lucky because both my wife and I are English speakers, but that's.
Your sons learn Hebrew in school? They've written?
They learn some. Yeah, most of my sons write pretty well, but they should write more. Even in their Torah learning, I see that a program that would have developed writing skills, if there was more demands upon them, even to write chaburas in Hebrew, dafka for the most talented. That's something that they should be developing, just so that it improves your thinking. I mean, I make my living as a writer, so I know that the organizational skills that come from writing, those are ways of thinking well. If you can't express yourself, as Rav Chaim Brisker used to say, if you can't express it, it doesn't exist. Don't tell me I have a great idea, but I can't express it. If you can't express it, it doesn't exist. We need more of those tools to develop a thought, to develop an essay, to learn the relationship between one idea and another and how they progress from one to another.
Excellent. Everything you say is fantastic. I wish we could interview you for
No, believe me,
Talk about what was your impression on Hachmey?
and Rabbi Tzalel.
So I've known Rabbi Cohen for over 10 years. And, it's really a pleasure for me to see him today, because when he came to me, he discerned in somebody else who was frustrated that the system was not allowing enough opportunities, but then he was only frustrated. And today, in the last 10 years, he's flourished in such an extent to have learned how to build an institution, to have built an institution, to see this beautiful school, and which is going to have a rapid expansion, in my opinion. And I see he's so happy, because then it was just frustration. Now there are a lot of opportunities for a younger generation, especially somebody like this who was a Talmid Chacham, was known as one of the top Bachrim in Ponevezh Yeshiva, was an elite learner, that he has the credibility to be able to combine these facets, and I'm sure that the school is going to have a major success.